I'll call tonight's meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Ms. Chester?
Here.
Ms. McLaughlin? Ms. Utman?
Present.
Mr. Warmbrun?
Here.
And Mr. Welch.
Okay, and we do have a quorum, so we can hold our meeting. Are there any changes to our agenda tonight?
No, sir.
Okay. You all each have a copy of the minutes of the previous meeting in your packets. Could you please review them? And I'm open for a motion.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the minutes are accepted. Are there any continued public hearings?
No.
Okay. At this point in the meeting, we ask that anyone who in the audience who may wish to speak on behalf of the cases for or against, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give is, to the best of your knowledge, truthful and honest? Thank you. And I'll just remind people in the audience that when you do come to speak, please step up to the table and state your name and sign in, please. Thank you. We do have written communications that have been submitted for the various cases. Each of you have a copy of those written communications. Tonight we're going to listen to cases for 3 different properties. We'll take them in the order that we have them before us. And the first cases are for a request by Todd Satterthwaite for a conditional use permit to allow a duplex at 703 West High Street in the R2 single-family zoning district, and a major variance by the same individual to grant a major variance to allow a duplex on a lot 50 feet wide and 4,700 square feet in area at 703 West High Street. So could we have the staff report, please?
Myself now.
Yes.
On these particular cases, I'd like to recuse myself this evening. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so as was just mentioned in the introduction, there are 2 related cases that I'll be giving a report on right now. The first is for a conditional use permit for the continued use of a duplex at 703 West High Street. That's in the R2 single-family zoning district. In the R2 district, all duplexes are required to have a conditional use permit. In addition, the variance request is required because the minimum lot width for a duplex in the R2 district is 60 feet, and the minimum lot area is 6,000 square feet. And the lot at 703 West High Street is only 50 feet wide, and it's an area of just over 4,700 square feet. So the major variance would be requesting the allowance of a duplex on a lot that is about 17% narrower and 21% less area than is required by the zoning ordinance. This property contains a single-family home which was converted into a duplex sometime around 1960, according to the previous owner. It's not clear exactly when it was converted, but the current applicant but the applicant has owned the property since 1986, and he's used it as a duplex ever since. According to the applicant, when he bought the property, he was unaware that there was a temporary certificate of occupancy that would allow the use as a duplex for a limited period, for a 4-year period set to expire on March 1st, 1988. But since the applicant did not know that the use was temporary, he's used it as a duplex ever since he took ownership of the property. Now the applicant would like to sell the property, and the new owners would like to continue, or the potential buyers would like to continue using it as a duplex, and the conditional use permit and this variance request would allow them to do so. To grant a conditional use permit, just as a refresher, the Zoning Board of Appeals is allowed to approve or deny that by a majority vote. And then with respect to the major variance, the Zoning Board would forward or can forward the case to the City Council with a recommendation to approve for the Council's final approval. Just for a little more background, the property is located in the northwestern corner of the West Urbana neighborhood, and it's just 2 blocks away from the U of I campus. If you'll see on Exhibit A, which I've pulled up here, property is located on High Street, just west of Kohler. It's along the block that it's on is predominantly rental properties that are used to rent to students. There's actually only one owner-occupied unit on that block, and that's actually a duplex with a second unit that is rented out. And as I mentioned before, this property has been used as a duplex since at least the early 80s, and more likely since the early 60s. In 1983, the city conducted the West Urbana Land Use Survey, which was an attempt to identify and correct illegal zoning and land use violations in the West Urbana neighborhood, and that was focused mainly on illegal conversions or improperly converted dwelling units. So taking units and converting them into multiple apartments, generally to rent to students. And then properties that were identified in that survey as being suspected of in violation. For those properties, the city required that the property owner would prove that the use in question had been established before 1950. Actually, it was before January of 1951, when the 1950 zoning ordinance came out, and that was the first zoning ordinance that established the minimum lot width and area requirements. Now, if the owner was not able to provide proof that the property was used as an apartment or a duplex use before 1950, then they were required to convert the property to an allowable use by August of 1984. The city would grant an extension of that for up to 4 years, and that's what happened in the case of this property. The owner filed for an extension. It was granted through March of 1988, and then in the interim, the property was sold to the applicant. Okay, now as I mentioned, the surrounding land uses are predominantly residential uses. There are quite a number of legally non-conforming uses. So those were uses that did meet the criteria that the city established, and were able to prove that they were used as multifamily units or duplexes before 1950. So you can see, it's hard to see up on the screen, but in the land use maps that are in your packets, those legally non-conforming uses are represented by hashed areas. So you can see that there are quite a few in the area. With respect to the comprehensive plan, the 2005 comprehensive plan identifies the future land use of this area. That's in Exhibit C. This property is located in an area that's identified as residential, and the comprehensive plan allows for primarily single-family residential, but says it may also include a variety of compatible land uses such as duplexes, townhomes, civic uses, etc. So the use as a duplex we feel would be compliant with the comprehensive plan. We feel that since the property has been in use for a duplex for somewhere between probably 30 and 50 plus years, to allow the continued use of 703 West High Street as a duplex would not really alter the character or be detrimental to the block that it's on or to the immediate neighborhood surrounding it. As I said, it's predominantly just student rentals, especially along that block. And we feel that it's within the character of that neighborhood. In terms of parking, the lot has 3 off-street parking spaces, and really depending on whether you would classify it as a traditional duplex, that would require 4 parking spaces, but the building's really laid out more as a 2-apartment building. And if we were to look at it as a building with 2 apartments, it would require 3 spaces. So we feel that the parking is adequate on the site. There's also there's permit parking on that street, and there are 2 spaces right in front of the house as well. Now, for a conditional use permit, there are 3 requirements that need to be met in order for it to be granted, and I'll run through those briefly. The first is that the proposed use is conducive to the public convenience at the location. Again, it's been used in its current fashion as a duplex for at least 30 years, and it is rented mostly to graduate students and to upperclassmen, and we feel that it's conducive to the public convenience due to its proximity to the university and the compatibility with the surrounding uses on the block. Criteria 2 is that the proposed use is designed, located, and proposed to be operated so that it will not be unreasonably injurious or detrimental to the district or to the public welfare. And again, it's been used in this fashion for over 30 years, and it has not been found to be injurious or detrimental to the district or to the public welfare. Criteria 3 is that the proposed use conforms to the applicable regulations and standards of and preserves the essential character of the district in which it shall be located. And again, we feel that since it's been used as it has as a duplex for over 30 years, that the continued use would not or would conform to the character of the surrounding area and to the R2 district in general. With respect to conditional use permits, the zoning board can grant additional conditions. You can add conditions onto the permit, such as regulating the location, extent, and intensity of uses, required screening, etc. All of these suggested conditions are in the memo that you have in front of you. With respect to the variance, there are 5 criteria that we look at, and I can run through those quickly as well. Number 1 is that the proposed variance will not serve as a special privilege, and we feel that the variance would not serve as a special privilege First of all, because this is, it's a rare case. It might even be a unique case, just due to the history of the property, and we feel that granting this variance would not be a special privilege because there might not be other cases like this that we would be, I guess, denying by granting this to just this one property. Also, there are a number of non-conforming, as I mentioned, a number of non-conforming duplexes and apartment buildings in the neighborhood. Even in adjacent properties, four of the adjacent properties were granted or were legal non-conforming uses, and the lots range in width from 40 to 50 feet. Again, the property in question is 50 feet wide, and range in area from just under 3,000 square feet to about 4,700 square feet. And again, this property is just over 4,700 square feet. So allowing this property to continue alongside such uses would not be a special privilege in the area. Criteria 2 is that the variance requested was not the result of a situation or condition having been knowingly or deliberately created by the petitioner. The petitioner purchased this house in 1986 and states that they were unaware that its use as a duplex was subject to the temporary certificate of occupancy ending in 1988. And neither the petitioner nor the city recognized that the duplex use had expired at the time. And this request is just an attempt to remedy a situation that was not knowingly created by the petitioner. Criteria 3 is that the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. I think I've explained how it will not alter the character of the neighborhood. Number 4 is that the variance will not cause a nuisance to the adjacent property. This property has not been a nuisance the entire time the applicant has owned it. I mean, we don't consider that it will become a nuisance to adjacent properties if the continued use of a duplex is granted. And finally, the final criteria is that the variance represents the minimum deviation from the requirements of the zoning ordinance necessary to accommodate the request. The applicant is not requesting any change to the size of the property or to the structure in any way. They're just asking for it to be continued, or for the duplex use to be continued. So I think by definition, the request is for the minimum deviation. So for these two cases, as I mentioned previously, the conditional use permit can be granted or denied by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So you can either grant the request of a conditional use without any conditions. You can grant the requested conditional use along with additional conditions, or you can deny the requested conditional use. With respect to the major variance case, you can forward the case to the City Council with a recommendation to approve the variance as requested. You can forward the case to the City Council with a recommendation to approve the variance with certain terms and conditions, or you can deny the variance requested. Staff would recommend Staff would recommend that the ZBA approve the request for a conditional use permit in case ZBA 2015C-01, and we likewise recommend that the Zoning Board of Appeals recommend approval of the request for a major variance in case ZBA 2015-MAJ-01 to the Urbana City Council. That concludes my report. I will mention that the owner is present to answer any questions you may have that I wouldn't be able to answer. We also received 2 written communications, which I believe you all have received, both electronically and in printed form. And I will welcome any questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin. Any questions for staff?
So if this had been discovered, the exemption for 4 years, it got missed. It's nobody, was keeping track of it. If it had been discovered, the property owner would have been required to return it to single family. Is that correct?
Most likely, or I suppose they could have gone through a similar proceeding, such as we're going through right now.
Were you aware that at the time there was at least one court case about the whole zoning ordinance and returning properties to the
Are
use they
you?
were?
Was that in the 80s, or was
Yes.
that later on?
Yes,
Was that the Wakeland case, or was that a different
that
case?
wasn't Wakeland. Wakeland was on Main Street.
Wakeland was later. Okay.
But it was a really big deal, and people were having fits about having to return their properties back to single family, or some had to return to duplexes because they were divided up into more, and people were required to do it. And this got missed, but that doesn't negate that it still should be single family, in my opinion, because everybody, would somebody want to come in today and say, oh, my single-family house now was a duplex before, and I want to take it back to a duplex? I mean, I think, duplexes are allowed,
Mm-hmm.
but it is zoned single-family. And that, that block itself has, well, if this was single-family, there'd be 9 out of the maybe 16 lots, I can't really count, that would be single-family. They may be rental, but they are still single-family. And you are shifting the balance by letting it be a duplex. I mean, this is an error, and I just don't think that it should be allowed to be a duplex. We need to correct that mistake, because a lot of people said at the time, well, I'm going to have to sell my property if I have to return it to single family. And people did. And it appears that the person who owned this sold his property. And the owner was unaware, but probably should have been. So it's a long time, but it is still zoned single family zoning.
Really, that's the entire reason for this case is
Right,
if
that's
it's not
exactly right.
granted, it will have to go back to single family.
Which is what should have happened. Mistakes get made. And that just because a mistake was made, that doesn't mean that you should let somebody have it. That's my opinion. Because it is still a really big issue in the neighborhood. And, people are always looking out to see what people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And checking mailboxes, checking names on mailboxes, over occupancy. It is an issue. And, it was all done to preserve the neighborhood. And I just don't think it would be right to allow it.
Were there other situations like this where conditional uses or another use has been allowed and it's gone on for this length of time with that in mind, and yet the use has there was a sunset clause on this particular use? Usually when we give conditional use permits, there isn't a timeline
Mm-hmm.
or a duration that's established. And consequently, that conditional use applies as long as the owner owns the residence, or in some cases, it's continued with the new owner.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of my question has to do with the timing of the petition, because here we're kind of preemptively acting on a petition to maintain the conditional use permit with the current owner, but the property is also in transition to a potential new owner. And so that raises the question, are we granting the conditional use permit to the existing owner, or are we granting it to an unknown new owner. And so, the first part of the question obviously it has to do with other cases that may be similar to this. Are there any precedents for this?
Yeah, in the research that I did, I think there were 8 properties that were identified in that land use survey that that staff at the time thought would not exist as legally non-conforming duplexes in the neighborhood. I'm not sure what the eventual number was, but if it were 8, and those were the only cases, or those were the only properties that would be subject, the only duplex properties that would be subject to the sunset clause, then I'm not surprised that we're not aware of any other times that this type of case has come up. Because if there were 8, maybe the other 7 reverted to single family uses. I guess they might still be out there, I'm not sure, but this is the first time we've dealt with this issue, as far as I know.
Okay.
So that's question 1.
Yeah.
And then question 2 was whether you'd be granting the CUP to the existing owner, or you'd be attaching it to the new owner as well, or granting it to continue with the property. Is that what you're asking?
If apparently the conditional use permit has something to do with the contingency of the sale of the property. So if we grant a conditional use permit, it makes the property attractive to whoever is buying it, who wants presumably to continue operating as a duplex. If we do not grant the conditional use permit and require it in effect to be converted back to single family residence, then it perhaps changes the nature of that sale. In any event, the petitioner is the current owner versus having made a sale and then the new owner having to come forward and make the petition for a conditional use permit himself or herself.
I think
So,
Mr.
yeah,
Engstrom wants to weigh in on that.
with some cases, with conditional uses especially, they may be attached to a particular business or owner, but for residential uses, it always stays with the property, no matter who the owner is. So the current owner is the petitioner, but all future owners would enjoy use of the conditional use if granted.
All right.
When you were talking about 8 properties, did you say there were 8 that were non-conforming in terms of their size?
There were 8 that were identified in that 1983 land use survey that they suspected would not meet the criteria to be grandfathered in as legally non-conforming uses.
For what reason?
I can't recall off the top of my head.
Well, one of the things that has happened in that neighborhood, I don't really know that much about it anymore, but was that there were, after that time, we kept track for a number of years of the number of houses that went from single family to owner occupied. And there were also there were a number of properties that were duplexes that were turned back to single family after this case. I mean, after that period in the 1980s. So somebody would buy, there was one that was a 3-unit that was turned back to single family, that I can recall off the top of my head. But once they do that, they can't go back to being a 3-family.
Correct.
Once you take it back to single family, it couldn't go back to being 3 apartments in a building.
Yeah, once you've terminated the legally non-conforming use, you can't return it to that use. That's correct.
Okay.
Nancy.
Joan, are you saying that apparently 8 property owners complied with the required change.
I don't know anything about these 8 properties.
No, now that I've had a second to think about it, there were, I believe, 17, and I'd probably have to look this up in that land use survey, but there were 17 or so duplex properties that that they thought might be in violation of that may have been illegally converted, just based on the survey that they had done. But they thought that only 8 of those wouldn't be able to meet, I believe it was a 15% threshold that the zoning board, there was some leeway in terms of lot width and area that the zoning board would be able to grant approval for. So there were, I guess it was about 9 properties that the zoning board could grant variances within their power at the time. I'm not sure if that's still the case for how the zoning board works. Yeah, so they could, it sounded like they'd be able to grant the variances for those 9 properties that might be within a reasonable amount in terms of width and area.
But were these all properties that had been duplexes before 1950?
No, the 17 were properties that they thought had been converted after 1950. So there are I'm not sure of the exact number. I think there's over 60 legal non-conforming duplexes that were grandfathered in. So those ones they set aside, but then they had 17 they thought were in violation and wouldn't be allowed to be grandfathered in. And then they took a number of those, and I think it was 9 of those that they thought they could grant variances for administratively or in some other way. So then they were left with this number of 8, of which this property was one, that they thought would have to revert back to a single-family use. So that's where I got the number 8 for the number of potential cases of this type that might have existed at one time. Sorry, I read through this, read through the land use survey last week, so I'm just trying to remember to the best of my ability.
Of those 8, then, did 7 of them comply and become single-family?
I'm not sure. We haven't done the research on that.
I know that some of them did. A lot of them did, because I can remember at least one off the top of my head. But
And I'm just talking about duplexes. So there was also this other number of illegal three or more unit
right.
3 or more unit ones that were converted, and I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Yeah. But it did happen, and property owners were very unhappy about having to reduce the occupancy levels in their buildings, and there were a lot.
Well, I think what I didn't point out in the discussion, but that might be pertinent to this case especially, is that there are 4 bedrooms in all in this house. So I think that if it were converted to a single family home, there would be 4 bedrooms. We allow 4 unrelated individuals to cohabitate. So I think if we required it to convert back to a single family home, it would most likely still be a rental unit. It would most likely have the same number of people living there as it has right now. It would just have a different designation, and some building work would have to be done to convert it back into a single family home.
As a duplex, it could have 8. So right.
There are
Bedroom
limits
size, right.
based on bedroom size.
Well, it just seems to me that if it were a single family, you know, you could have 4 occupants. If it continues as a duplex, you could have 2 in the 1-bedroom duplex and 4 in the 3-bedroom part, which would give you a total of 6 occupants.
Well, I'm not certain. I'm not certain how many people generally have rented the unit throughout the years. You could ask the property owner about that. And I'm not sure if you could add a condition for number of people. I'm getting some head shakes, so this conditional use permit can't regulate that. So I withdraw that idea.
Okay, well, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Would the petitioner like to come forward?
I don't have a whole lot to
Could
add.
you state your name,
Okay.
please, and sign in?
I'm Todd Satterthwaite, owner of the property at 703 West High, and I don't have a lot to add to what Kevin said, other than, you know, I was first made aware that it was a non-conforming use. I think, as Joanne said, it was a big issue in the neighborhood, and one of the neighbors was checking the uses of the homes and found that this home was indeed a duplex when it should have been a single family. And came to, I think, the Community Development Department, and the Community Development Department looked up the owner, which was me, and I was mayor at the time, and said, you know, you have this non-conforming use. I said, well, I wasn't aware of that, no. And I said, well, it was just a few years ago that the city, I changed out the old octopus furnace and put a new furnace in. And they said, well, you have to have 2 furnaces because it's a duplex. And so, and that, I can't remember, that was probably 95 or 96 that happened. And then since, then when the multifamily recycling program started, then this has been treated as a duplex ever since that happened. And with the rental registration program, it's been treated as a duplex by the city ever since that happened. So it has been a duplex, and as Kevin said, there hasn't been a problem with it. You know, in fact, my experience, having lived in that neighborhood for 20 years, the rentals that are single family are sometimes more of a problem than with the duplexes, because that's where the big house parties are, where you have the whole house is rented by roommates, and they have a y'all come party. In fact, you know, that happened right across the street from me when I lived in the 700 block of Oregon. And those were the problem properties. It was the ones that were single family but were still rental, because then the roommates had the whole house. But other than that, I don't think I have anything to add.
And how many people actually live in the duplex currently?
There are 4. I've never rented to more than 3 in the back, unless there was one time there was a mother with kids, and I can't remember if she had 2 or 3 kids. So there may have been 4 in the back, the 3-bedroom at one time. And one time in the 1-bedroom, right at the end of his lease, the tenant had his fiancee come and live with him for a couple of months before the lease ended. But it's, you know, it's really too small for 2 people, and so they got another place right away. Occasionally there have been more than 1 person per bedroom, but very infrequently over the 29 years that I've had it.
And with the rental registration program, that actually regulates to a certain degree the number of people or individuals that rent? Or does it? Does it have any
No.
control over that?
It just, the rental registration program is for the inspection, the routine inspection of any rental property.
But not occupancy?
I'm not sure if they check for occupancy during that or not.
They'll check and see if there's more than 4 unrelated.
Right.
So you were aware in 1996 that it was non-conforming
Well, I don't know if
and
it
needed
was-
2 furnaces because it was a duplex and previously?
Well, they didn't tell me when I got the permit to have 2 furnaces in there, to put the new furnaces in, because you have to get a permit for that. But they didn't say that it was non-conforming at that time. It was only later when the resident of the area was doing a check and then informed the city, and then they informed me. So it was some years after the furnace was put in, the 2 furnaces were put in. But I can't remember what year that was.
I will say that I told them to.
Pardon me?
I told code enforcement that it was single
I
family.
can't hear you.
I told code enforcement that it was we had it coded as single family. I don't know if somebody else did too, but they were aware of that. But I have no memory of when it was.
Yeah, I think it was the late 90s.
Yeah, I have no memory. And I knew from looking at the property record cards, the original property record cards, that as of 1955, it was still single family. But I just told him that was all I could do. And it's still coded as single family in all the assessors stuff.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
I'm sorry, I could not hear you.
It's still coded as single family in all the assessors stuff.
It is.
Yes.
So typically, if this were a legal duplex, would it have been changed in the assessor's record?
Yes.
Are there any further questions for the petitioner? Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on behalf of the request or against? All right. Do we have a motion? I think what we'll do is we'll take each request for the, beginning with the conditional use first, and then we'll do them each motion separately rather than together. I think that would be the best way to do it.
I'll try this. That probably help. I move that ZBA case 2015C01, a request by Todd Satterthwaite for a conditional use permit to allow a duplex at 703 West High Street in the R2 Single Family Zoning District be denied. Is that right?
I second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. So a yes vote would be to deny, just for clarity. A motion, vote for the motion would be to deny it. Okay. And may we have the roll call, please?
Ms. Chester,
Yes.
Ms. Utman,
Yes.
Mr. Warren Brown abstained, and Mr. Armstrong.
No. So that is defeated. And I guess does it make the second motion, the major variance, moot?
I think it does, but it couldn't hurt to put her on record.
All right. So
are the request for a major variance in case CBA-2015, MAJ-01.
Yeah, we probably should read the motion in full. We should read it in full, I think, to enter it into the record.
I recommend denial of the request for a major variance in case CBA-2015-major-01.
And then the request by Todd Satterwhite to grant a major variance to allow a duplex on a lot 50 feet wide, 4,737 square feet in area at 703 West High Street in the R2 zoning district. Okay. Second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. May we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Buchanan?
Yes.
Mr. Mombron abstains. Mr. Armstrong?
No.
And Ms. Chester?
Yes.
Okay, and that is also defeated. Okay. All right. So we can move on to the next case. Charles will rejoin us. This is ZBA case 2015-C-02, a request by HG Dwell LLC for a conditional use permit to allow the use of a banquet facility / event space at 202 West Illinois Street in the mixed office residential zoning district.
All right, thank you. Yes, this is a request, as you just mentioned, by HG Dwell LLC to allow for a conditional use permit to establish a banquet facility / event space. It would be on a 0.4 acre parcel located at 202 West Illinois Street in the MOR zoning district. It would be within the existing building currently occupied by the Korean New Life Church, or most recently occupied as the Korean New Life Church. In addition to the proposed use, there would be an office use in the rear part of the building, which is allowed by right in the mixed office residential district. The subject property was originally developed as a church. I think the cornerstone said it was laid in 1894, 1895. Here's an image of it. It was a Baptist church for a long time, and it's always been a church in this location. And this is just photos of the church as it looks today. And this photo is of the rear section, which would become office space. And here's an overhead view of the parcel. Everything outlined in teal here. So the applicants are requesting permission for this use. They propose to remodel and repair the property, to renovate it as a banquet center and as professional office space, modern space. On March 16th, the City Council approved a development agreement to provide redevelopment incentives for this property. There will be tax reimbursements and another percentage reimbursement for the actual redevelopment work. The applicant says they are going to invest up to $1.2 million in the property, and it's expected to generate new food, alcohol, and property taxes for the city. Taking a look at the property, it's about The lot itself is about 17,800 square feet. The building has a floor area over 18,000 square feet. It's okay. Looking at the location and land use map, this property is located in the southwest corner of downtown Urbana at the corner of Race Street and Illinois. It's right across from Lincoln Square Mall and the parking lot there. But it's right on the edge of where West Urbana begins with single-family duplex uses. Looking at the surrounding property uses, to the north of the property there are single-family homes. There are some single-family homes. Let's see. There are apartments to the north as well. To the south, there are apartments right along Race Street, and further in along Illinois, there's more single-family and duplex homes. Directly east is a central business district. It's a large parking lot, and there's a large apartment building, and a large senior housing complex. And to the west, there are more single-family homes and duplexes. Looking at the zoning, this property is zoned MOR, Mixed Office Residential. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose of that district in a minute. Surrounded on the north and side by more MOR properties. To the east is B4 Central District, and to the west is R2 Single Family Residential. Looking at the comprehensive plan future land use map, the property is just on the edge of downtown in the West Urbana residential district. The pattern is urban development, urban style residential, which does allow for a mix of uses, predominantly residential, but also institutional uses and small businesses. Get to that later. So the proposal is to establish a banquet facility and event space in the sanctuary and the kitchen areas of the church. And the rear of the church used to be classrooms on 2 levels and a gymnasium on the 3rd level. Those would all become modern office space. And the office part is allowed by right. So we're asking the ZBA to consider just the banquet facility use at this time. Unfortunately, our zoning ordinance does not have an entry for banquet facility, which we discovered last year when we had a conditional use permit for one of those. And we are still working on getting that updated in our zoning ordinance. But as it is not listed, what we do is the zoning ordinance says the zoning administrator looks to see what are the most closely aligned uses, and it would be the proposed use would then be allowed under those permissions. So for our banquet facility, it's going to have a commercial kitchen. It'll serve drinks and food to guests. It'll host events. That's most closely aligned to the uses of restaurant and lodge or private club. And both of those uses are allowed in the MOR district with a conditional use permit. A little bit of detail about the use. The applicant is here. She'll be able to give you more details. They plan on using the floor of the sanctuary. It will be leveled and used as the open gathering space. The existing kitchen will be renovated as a commercial kitchen for event usage and perhaps for farmers market people as well. Those details have not been worked out yet. The applicant is going to repair the exterior of the building, replace the roof, tuck point the bricks, and eventually they plan on rebuilding the original bell towers of the facility. You can see a rendering here. Let's see. So this lot was originally developed in the 19th century, which predates zoning. As you can tell, it's a very large building in an urban setting, so it does not meet zoning standards currently. It's non-conforming for things like height, for floor area ratio, for open space ratio, for provision of off-street parking, and required yards. Since there are no changes proposed to the footprint of the building, all of those nonconformities would be allowed to continue, except for parking. So the proposed change of use would increase the amount of required parking. As a church, it was required to have one parking space for every 5 seats in the main seating area. They did not meet that requirement previously. The applicant proposes to meet the requirement for parking mostly by leasing off-site parking. The table of parking requirements does not have an entry for a banquet facility. The closest use, according to the zoning administrator, is all other food sales and services. So with that use, there's one parking space required for every 250 square feet of floor area. Additionally, the office in the back will require one parking space for every 300 square feet of floor area. The exact parking requirement is going to be determined when the building permits come in and we know what exactly the areas are for each use. But we've done a preliminary analysis. It looks like there's 11,000 square feet of office, which would require 38 parking spaces. There's some amount over 10,000 or 12,000 square feet of total floor area for the banquet space. Some of that will probably be converted to utility use. And the zoning ordinance also allows an exception or a reduction in parking when 2 uses are on the same property, 2 different complementary uses. The zoning ordinance allows a 15% reduction in the required parking. So with the office use, which is mainly a workday use, and the banquet use, which is mainly a nighttime and weekend use, those are complementary uses. We believe the required parking would be about 75 spaces. In terms of the comprehensive plan, and those spaces would be provided for within 600 feet of the property, as allowed by the zoning ordinance. Most likely, the majority of them would be at Lincoln Square parking lot, and the others would be at another parking lot to the north. I'm not sure if the details are worked out on those yet. We're suggesting a condition to make sure that gets worked out. The comprehensive plan has a couple goals and objectives that are relevant to this case. Goal 28, develop a diversified and broad, stable tax base, increase the allocation of land devoted to tax generation commercial uses. And also goal 12, preserve the characteristics that make Urbana unique, encourage public and private partnerships, to preserve and restore historic structures and sites. There is a public and private partnership entered into by the city in the form of a development agreement, which will allow for the continued use of this structure without it being torn down. And it would also transition from a non-tax generating institutional use to a tax generating private use. Conditional use permits, as Kevin had mentioned, we have 3 preliminary criteria or primary criteria. The first is that the proposed use is conducive to the public at that location. The building itself is conducive to large gatherings of people, as it has been for over 100 years. It's got a large sanctuary space, which is just begging to be used. The site is centrally located in downtown Urbana. It's easy for residents to get to by MTD bus, walking, bicycling, or driving. The site is close to convenient parking, public parking downtown, in addition to any private parking that will be required. The second criteria, proposed use is designed, located, and operated so that it will not be injurious or detrimental to the district in which it's located. Applicant states that this will not be a detriment to the neighborhood. The structure has very thick walls, which will dampen any potential noise. They're arranging for the off-site parking, so vehicles from office workers and event guests won't impact the residential areas immediately surrounding the use. The third criteria, the proposed use conforms to applicable regulations and standards of and preserves the essential character of the district in which it shall be located. So the purpose of the MOR district is to encourage a mix of residential, office, and small-scale business land uses that are limited in scale and intensity and designed to be compatible with the existing structures. The district is intended to encourage adaptive reuse of existing older structures that will extend the useful life of some of such structures. So this isn't a typical lot for the MOR district. Most of the MOR properties are older homes, things of that nature. But this use will definitely extend the useful life of the structure, and it will allow for the adaptive reuse of the structure. The use is consistent with the character of the neighborhood. It's right on the edge of downtown, but the surrounding residential area has several other uses interspersed within it, such as businesses and churches and schools. And essentially, the property will continue to appear as an historic church in an urban neighborhood. The proposed use will not create any additional nonconformities on the site, and it really should not be any more disruptive to the neighbors than the previous use, which was the church, which had regularly hosted large gatherings for several decades. Consideration, the zoning board may adopt additional conditions as required to maintain the public health and safety and welfare. Options tonight, the zoning board may grant the conditional use permit as submitted, may deny the conditional use permit, or may grant the conditional use permit along with additional conditions necessary to maintain the public health, safety, and welfare. Staff's recommendation tonight is to approve or to grant the proposed conditional use permit, subject to the following condition. that the required parking spaces for the use shall be determined, the required amount of parking spaces for the subject site shall be determined by the zoning administrator and provided at locations subject to review and approval by the zoning administrator. I'll note that staff received one communication about this case, which was forwarded to the zoning board from Pastor Chet Daniels of the Redeemer Church. He had questioned the need for an event center in downtown. Those were the only communications we received. And the applicant is here to answer any questions, and I'd be happy to answer questions for staff.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for staff? Okay, Charles?
Okay, let's see where to start. All right, if they, you're saying they're not changing the footprint of this, but if they build these bell towers, aren't they changing the footprint of the building?
Well,
If they're going to be serving bourbon in the bell towers, wouldn't, I mean,
they might be adding some floor area. We haven't determined that yet. I'm not sure if
there's a lot of things we haven't determined. That's what my problems are. So, okay, so forget that then. So we're talking about a banquet facility here. That's our main thrust.
Correct.
So we're putting a kitchen in the basement. We have no diagrams, we have no drawings, we have nothing to tell us what kind of kitchen's going in there other than a commercial kitchen.
The applicant is here. She can answer questions.
Well, I'm kind of disappointed in staff that we have, we have no drawing of the building, correct? We have these things here in this nice presentation that's given to us. That's the way it currently looks, correct?
I think there are floor plans for the office side, but nothing for the banquet center.
The ones that say classroom and kindergarten and nursery,
Yes, that is the
current?
that is the office portion, or the proposed office portion, but that is the current.
There's going to be a kindergarten in the office portion?
That's the current layout of the
Thank you.
portion. that
That's
will
what I'm
become
asking.
office.
So
Yes, sir.
there are no diagrams with the proposed layouts of any of these floors?
We haven't received a building permit yet. They're coming with the general concept of the use first.
And we're to pass this on a general concept?
Yes, sir.
Has the fire department looked at any of this? For occupancy and for egress in the basement kitchen?
I know their architect has, and the fire department will look at them when they come for the building permit.
I just have a really hard time saying that, okay, go ahead and put a kitchen in the basement and not know what we're talking about here. Okay, how many doors are there that you can get out of this building right now? 3 plus the upper?
That would be a question for the applicant.
Okay. Is there still a law in the city of Urbana that you can't have a liquor license within 1,000 feet of a church? Or is it 500 feet?
I'm not sure what the distance is exactly.
Do you know the distance from this church to the next church?
Yeah. We will.
Kitty corner?
I think it could be a school. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's the church also, but maybe they change that when they let liquor be sold on Sunday morning. Well, that was probably put in with the hotel thing, but. And then there's some question about the added advantage here that they're going to give us this revenue with alcohol and food, and I'm trying to figure out now where we're coming up with these figures. So are they using 0.5%?
These will be great questions for the applicant.
But you guys haven't asked them any of this? I mean, I
Well-
sat and watched the city council do this on television, and it's a fabulous idea to try and generate revenue and stuff, but at some point, we have to have something here that we can say,
I can say the Economic Development Division has vetted the agreement, so they have vetted the estimates of tax income. I don't know what the tax rates are.
and do we know what, did they tell you how many people they thought might be in there at the maximum at an event?
They projected 500 or around 500.
So when the event is over, 500 people are coming out of that church onto the street there with the houses around it and everything. All right, thank you.
Let me just ask a question for clarity here. Since we don't have any detailed information about how this facility would actually be set up and planned, if we grant a conditional use permit, are we assuming that all the legal requirements with regards to occupancy, life safety issues, et cetera, are going to be met as the architectural drawings are developed? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Or is the conditional use permit contingent on us seeing that proposal in detail first before we issue the conditional use permit? Do you understand the question?
Yes, I do. You could grant it either way. You could require them to obtain all additional permits, which it's understood that they're going to conform with all laws and obtain all required permits, but sometimes that's explicitly made a separate condition for conditional uses. Or if you feel this application's incomplete, I think you could, you wouldn't really grant it now, but you would table it and ask for them to return.
Okay. Another question I have is when the city council agreed to enter into this partnership, was it with the understanding that this would be used as this kind of facility? In other words, was the city assuming that it was going to be used as a banquet facility as well as office space, or were they just basing that on the idea that the building would have a mixed-use function of some kind?
No, the agreement is contingent upon the developer getting this conditional use permit.
Okay. Are there any other questions for staff? All right, thank you. And would the petitioner like to come forward, please? If you weren't here, I don't think you were here at the beginning of the meeting, and so I have to swear you in before you can speak. So please rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this board is truthful and honest to the best of your ability?
I do.
Thank you. And please state your name and sign in.
I'm Megan Gillette, partner in HG Dwell. And I'll begin by saying that I never set out to buy or develop a church. It came across my radar as being for sale, and I am a big art history and architectural enthusiast and historical preservationist. And when I walked through it the first time, I couldn't really imagine what could be done with it. I walked through it with a out-of-town developer, and they tried to figure out how you could carve it up into condominiums or apartments, and I knew that that's not something you can do with that space. I mean, you can, but it's not something that should be done with that space. So I really set out to develop a plan. How can this building be saved and be economically viable? Because it's an incredibly expensive project. It needs tons of tuck pointing. It needs lots of plaster repair. The windows would need to be repaired by specialists over the next 10 years, one at a time. If you look at the edges of the rectory in the back, the secondary structure, you can see that the limestone cap is actually pushing the bricks apart, and it's a concern that it will become a safety hazard. And if it doesn't have to be demolished in some respect. So that was, I started really researching how can we save this building. And when I came up with the idea to turn it into office space and event space, I started looking at how converted churches have been repurposed throughout the country and throughout the world. And after I first walked through it, I think I got in touch with the city right away and said, is this something you would even consider? And they said, well, send it through and let us take a look at it. Let's see what kind of uses it could take on. And the day after I sent that out, there was an article in the travel section of the New York Times on all of the churches that have been repurposed into cultural centers and student centers and restaurants and breweries, and that was just in Pittsburgh. So it started to look like a great use for this space. And it's not, we're talking about this very singularly as an event space and banquet space, because that is the zoning that we're asking for the conditional use for. But in my mind, I see it more as a cultural center, and part of the plans for it do include having an architectural history of Urbana Museum in the colonnade, and I did receive a public arts grant to produce that exhibit. And I feel like this is the oldest standing structure in the town. I mean, not structure, church in the town. And it's such an institution and a cultural landmark of Urbana. I feel like it's something that should really be opened to the community and enjoyed by the community. And the location of it, I think, really makes it accessible. And to answer some of your questions about code, we have had a full code evaluation from our architect, who has talked extensively with Jeff, the building,
Yes,
Steve Cochran.
Steve Cochran, the building inspector.
And so we have planned to put full fire suppression in place, add extra egress doors from the sanctuary. And there, something you might not be aware of, there is an existing kitchen in the basement. There is fire suppression above the stove with the hood, and but most of it is not conforming for public health. So we would just be upgrading it, and we have had public health through to tell us what kind of stipulations they would change, and we would give priority to people who needed a commissary certified kitchen to sell things at the farmers market in Urbana. And lastly, the actual footprint of the building shouldn't change at all. We are not adding anything on to the structure besides potentially recreating the original bell towers that have been lost over time. And I am confident we can do this. And I did receive a couple years ago the most historically respectful award for an addition and expansion on a historical Spanish Mission style home on Michigan Avenue. So that's all. Yes.
Do you know who the architect was of the building?
Emerson Stanford Hall. He was an Urbana architect who became quite well known in Chicago. He did many churches, and he studied acoustics. So this space is almost acoustically perfect. It has double-barreled ceilings that project from the pulpit
and the organ on the second level that project the sound and the music throughout the whole space. It's incredible. And in the colonnade, which you see at the front, that rounded section, there's actually a choir loft there, and what we were proposed to do is remove one of the post-original construction walls, so it would actually be able to bring the sound back through the space. And we had some acoustic musicians in there a couple weeks ago to try out the acoustics, and it was amazing.
Is there an elevator in the building?
There is not.
Do you?
It was built before electricity and plumbing.
So would
Has
you
some
be,
fireplaces.
would you be putting an elevator in the office area?
We will do as we need to with the code. As it stands now, it would be tricky the way the
Okay.
building is configured, the way the footprint's configured. Something we will have to do is create fire separation walls throughout the staircase.
Okay.
With the renderings that you provide in the packet, it shows a number of what I assume are different possibilities for using the space for offices as well as your major banquet multi-use space. But are we to assume that these are simply proposals that are being vetted here as opposed to, some of the renderings get very specific with,
I'm sorry, some of the what?
well, for example,
renderings, sorry.
on the third floor, it shows a plan which is incomplete, but in one rendering it shows an open space, and another rendering shows a loft area with what I assume is a bar or serving area with even a pool of some kind.
And this is
in the
for the
floor.
basketball court?
I'm not
Sorry.
sure because it's not
Which-
listed, and it's,
See
I'm
which
looking at this
rendering we're
page.
looking at. Oh, that is an idea. That's actually the gymnasium, the third floor of the basketball court. And what I was looking at doing there, here, let me get to it so we all know, is there, you can see the upper right picture is the actual basketball court, and you see that there's that wooden wainscoting. And there's actually a mezzanine up there. So actually what I was proposing for this space is that it would be an open office space. And you could open it up and have additional offices that connected to the open office space in the gymnasium. And a kitchenette.
yes. Any other questions? Nancy?
I just wanted to say I have been in this as a church, and it is a beautiful structure. I mean, it is an amazing space, and I'm glad to have it preserved. And I think the other thing to think about is that when this church was built, it was not built for people who primarily walked to church, or brought their horses, or whatever. And the streets were much narrower, so this Illinois Street was narrower, Ray Street was narrower. So over time, the street has taken some of the green space away.
Absolutely. The original photographs of the building or renderings, there's a lot more green space around it. And, well, as you can see, if you go look at the exhibit in Lincoln Square now, the whole downtown was utilized so differently.
Mhm.
Charles?
People thought that Blair Park was way too far away to develop into a park. So
It is a good 20-minute walk. 15.
Is 500 the estimate, the maximum estimate you're thinking of it, having it at one event?
That would, yes, that certainly depends on fire code and code review. Currently, just in the pew seating, it is it has seating for 315.
You're eliminating the pews, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, my concern is, if, say, 500 or even 315 is fine with me. If we're at, say, a wedding or something and the event ends at a specific time and 315 people are leaving, to me, the infrastructure there is not there on that particular corner to handle 315 people coming out. I don't know how many doors you're going to have, maybe 5 or 6 doors even, because the doors that you're adding won't be to the street side, they'll be to the residential sides. And that bothers me. Can you answer how we came up with these tax figures that you have in your little brochure that you're going to be adding to the city?
I will try. My partner does most of the pro formas, but we did a lot of due diligence. We looked at what kind of food sales and event sales you would have with catered events. We talked to a lot of local restaurant owners and bar owners to see what their projections were. And we also went down and visited a historic church down in Nashville that has recently been reopened as an event center. And I think that's something they face, is I guess they have about 3 exits, and there's event spaces on higher levels, but I think, like Ms. Utman said, it's something, I think we're a little more tentative in this town because we're not as urban, but I think that there's going to be a movement to be more urban and to learn to use the facilities we have. And we've also asked in our proposal for the city of Urbana to help with streetscaping around that area to accommodate more pedestrian safety.
See, by my figures, I'm coming out with got $755,000 a year in food and liquor sales, the way I'm figuring it. And I'm not telling you that that's right or wrong. And I don't know if that's a ballpark figure of what you think. And that, to me, has just the food element in there. The city's, which is 0.5% of, to come up with the food and liquor would be 0.5%. And I'm backtracking it, and I came up with that, to which to me that's $2,000 a day. And I suppose a wedding is $10,000 to $15,000 these days. So on a Saturday, you do a wedding for $10,000, you have your 315 people there or whatever, and then you're well on your way to making your $755,000 if you can do that 4 or 5 times a month, I assume. But
And to be clear, we wouldn't be doing catering. That would all be hired out.
okay.
But I mean, we do account for that in the figures, yes.
Well, but you're okay. See, and that's the other thing I don't understand is, let's say that you're the farmer's market. I'm afraid I don't attend that very often at all, but somebody would be cooking in your place that's certified by public health, and they'll have their license and everything, and you'll let them use your kitchen, charge them a rental, I assume, and then they'll take the product right from your kitchen to the market. Is that the way that would work?
I believe so.
Okay. And you would not have figured that into your food sales, though? That would be some other category?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And then nobody's told you about not being able to get a liquor license because you're too close to that church?
No.
No. Okay. It used to be the rule, but I don't know if it is anymore or not, so.
And we've certainly been very transparent with the city from the conception of the idea about our plans and what would be and wouldn't be possible, and they've been very supportive.
And your bourbon testing thing, that would be a weekly thing or a weekend thing, or you haven't figured that out yet?
That would be a specialty item you could add on to a reception.
And then is there any good reason that you can't get us a drawing of what you wanted to do? Your architect hasn't done that yet for your kitchen in the basement and for the things that you have in your mind?
I suppose the good reason is that we're looking at around $9,000 for that, to not know if we're going to go forward with the project or not, depending on the zoning outcome.
Well, but my problem is that I'm, at this board, I'm used to seeing things like that says this is what we want to do, this is why we want this conditional use permit, because this is how we're going to do it. And that's like, I'm going to have a hard time voting for this just because I don't know what I'm voting for, if you can follow that line of logic. I like the principle, but I don't know. We'll see, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the audience who wishes to speak on behalf of the petition? Yes.
Hi, my name is Frances Harris. I live at 508 West Oregon, so I'm here as a resident of West Urbana. I'm also here representing the Champaign-Urbana Folk and Roots Festival. We're currently planning our 7th festival in downtown Urbana. First, I'll speak as a resident of the neighborhood. I'm pretty thrilled at the thought that this church won't go to rack and ruin. And that somebody like this has put together, I think, a very thoughtful plan. As to drawings of the kitchen, I really understand why that's difficult. What do you do first, and what can you pay for? It's a cart and horse question, but I think they've really done their homework in terms of the vision for the space and the purpose for the space. I think it really matches well with the developments that are going on Main Street that Matt Cho is working on. I think it positions downtown Urbana and the nearby area as very forward-thinking, is very, it would really revitalize the area. I'm not worried, and my neighbors are not worried about the traffic, although, I don't live right on Illinois, but it's, right across the street from Lincoln Square. I think it's a real stretch. For those of us who are already, we have to have permits to park in front of our houses. This is not, we're much more concerned about an empty building that is falling apart than about something like this. The Folk and Roots Festival would very, very much like to stay in downtown Urbana. We occupy spaces during that weekend of all types. We use the Urbana Free Library extensively, the Iron Post, the Rose Bowl. We've used Lincoln Square. We used to use the Independent Media Center. But you want to talk about not being ADA compliant and not having very good sound or acoustics. I don't know Megan, I've never met her, but when she just said that the sound is perfect, I mean, we're a music festival, we're a dance festival, the drawing show, wood floor, this is good. The last couple years, we've been in the Landmark. I can't imagine that anyone isn't worried about the viability of its current incarnation. It would also kind of break my heart if this were to go down, whereas that went ahead. In terms of who has the background and who's done their homework. It seems to us that this kind of space is ideal for the festival. We need a big space for the headline acts. For that we've used the Landmark, and we've used the IMC. We've had probably at our biggest events no more than about 200 people. For the festival itself, people tend to park in the parking garage and in Lincoln Square. And this past year, since we used the landmark, people were able to park there. And from there, it's all walking. And it's families. And it just to us, this seems like a real natural fit for our festival. And then for me as a resident, well, also I should say a couple more things about the festival. Besides the sanctuary space being good for some of our bigger events, which would be concerts or dances. We have contra dances, square dances, Cajun dances. People are coming from Indiana, from Chicago, Decatur, Bloomington. It's our 7th year. If you Google Folk Roots Festival, we're on the first page. So but we need some assurance that we can hold these larger events in downtown Urbana if we're going to stay here. And this just seems like a good space for that. But we also have lots of workshops. And the workshops are participatory. We've used the Community Center for the Arts for some of those, where people come and learn to play the guitar or the harmonica, ukulele. They learn specialized dances. We have instrument try-it tents. And it seems like there's also room in this design for those kinds of activities as well. Just a lot of flexibility built in. And then we also have some year-round shows. And so we've used the Iron Post for those, we've used the Rose Bowl, but we're also using some spaces now like the Upper Bout, which is in Champaign. Again, we'd like to stay in Urbana if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on behalf? Yes. And did I swear you in?
Yeah.
Earlier? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
My name is Jonah Weiskopf. I live at 505 South Race, about 3 houses down. I also own 501 South Race, an adjacent property on the corner to the south of the church, as well as 509 South Race, 3 down. I just wanted to speak on behalf of this project. The woman just up here kind of said many of the things that I was kind of going to echo, but I think in terms of the reuse and kind of adapted reuse of a space like this, it's hard to imagine a more thoughtful developer. I think that it's always important to look at the alternatives of what could happen. And I think the main point I kind of wanted to make is I think that if this doesn't kind of work and it doesn't follow through, I think that, having an empty church there or a dying building, or having it all carved up into apartments, which would potentially be its fate, I think would be a worse fate. I think it's a great opportunity to continue to grow downtown Urbana, the Race Street corridor, as kind of a vibrant, culturally oriented, neat area. Yeah, I mean, I'm just think this is a great idea. I think it's really cool. And as far as, 315, 500 people, I mean, you can imagine, I think the numbers at the farmers market is in the thousands of people, and that manages and succeeds very well. So again, I think the idea of that location, on the one hand, it's on the border of single families as you head to the west. On the other hand, to the east, you've got all the vibrancy that the farmers market and that general area has created. So I actually think it's situated quite well. Yeah, that's kind of all I have to say. So thanks for the time.
Okay, thank you.
Could you please sign the sheet right there? I'm sorry.
I signed the sheet back there, or
Could you sign that
okay.
one too? Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak on behalf of the motion? Anyone here to speak against the motion? Yes. And I don't believe I swore you in.
Yes, I was
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
And I honestly, I don't know that, let me say, my name is Cynthia Oliver. I live at 205 across the street from the proposed building. And I actually don't necessarily mean to speak against, but I am conflicted about it. On the one hand, I would love to see that church remain. I think that it would be a help to the community to see it supported and just remain in the community in a kind of pristine condition. On the other hand, I think that the numbers of people that have been talked about in relation to its occupancy has been a little misleading. While it might be capable of housing 350 or 500 people, in my 15 years of living here, there has never been that amount of people coming out of that building. So I'm a little concerned about what those real numbers might be. I'm excited by the idea of a cultural center. I think a cultural center would be awesome. I am worried about volume and the impact on the immediate surrounding area. It's one thing to live a number of streets away and be excited about that space being reutilized. It's another thing to live right across the street from it and have volumes of people pouring out onto a space that's so close to my home. So I have those kinds of concerns about it. I'm not sure how that can be resolved in terms of the numbers of people or the parking concerns. Parking in that area is very difficult. On Illinois Street, it's challenging. And how you channel people to the appropriate parking spaces as opposed to them trying to locate something right there in the neighborhood, right around the specific area, I don't know. But those are some of the concerns that I have. So on the one hand, I would love to see this building preserved and utilized in a really kind of culturally enlivened way. I'm an artist. I would love that. I would love to do something in there if it were possible. But at the same time, I'm concerned about volume, traffic, and once that Bourbon Bell Tower happens, the inebriated folks stumbling on my lawn. So I feel both ways about it.
Okay. Thank you. And
Could you
please sign
please-
in.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak on this issue? Yes.
My name is Norma Linton. I live at 300 West Illinois Street, and I have a property next to me on 405 South Cedar. I've lived in this house, which is a half a block away from the church, since 1988. I will say that for a quarter of a century or more, I worked at the University Library in the Conservation Department, helping to preserve a lot of the 14 million books or more that we have there. I've restored my house and the house next door, and so preservation and conservation are certainly my first and second names. And I'm all for preserving a building such as this, but I think the location is a problem. I can tell you that there is a lot of parking drift, and there always has been associated with this church, on Cedar Street. It's right around the corner, and it's very convenient. When it was church overflow, it wasn't an issue, but at night it is an issue, because even if the sound within the sanctuary can be contained, the coming and going of getting in and out of the sanctuary has always been a problem, especially when it's late at night. And the sound cannot be contained. I heard sneakers on that gym floor for many years, for many evenings when they used to have basketball games in there. And that didn't go on till late hours, so it wasn't an issue. But the sound comes out. And as I say, the coming and going to the facility is another kind of sound. So that's not even the question of amplified sound. Once amplification kicks in, then that's really hopeless to contain it. So my concern is the disruption to not only my house and the house next door, but to all the houses around there. I do not believe that it can be contained and that people can be told not to park in X number of places, or that the expulsion of people onto the little properties all around there could be controlled very well. So that's my comment as a resident practically adjacent to the building. And it is a wonderful building, and I hope that this is not do or die, that if this project doesn't go through, that the church is razed. I don't have that impression, but certainly I would like to see it preserved, but not with this particular use, and not with alcohol and night. It's the night noise that I think would be a major problem for our community there.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Yes. And have you been sworn in, sir?
I think I came afterwards.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give before this board is truthful and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dustin Allred, and I'm another neighbor. I actually live in the house that is just to the north, one in from Race, so 203 West High Street. I'm kind of, like Cynthia, kind of mixed in terms of how I feel about the project. I think it's really important, of course, to preserve these kind of structures. And I would like to see it preserved much more than I would like to see it sort of fall into disrepair. We just had a building torn down just south of the library recently, which I think was a loss, and now we're faced with a vacant lot in the community, which no one wants. At the same time, I do think the nuisance issues, particularly noise, particularly late at night, would be major concerns in terms of how a use like this would fit into the existing context. I mean, to me, it's kind of a bit disingenuous to say that it fits within the existing context of the MOR, which is technically true, but when you look at the line that's drawn for the MOR, but it's also on the edge of the MOR and butts up against a residential area, which is largely single-family residential, with the exception of a few apartment buildings on Race Street. A lot of the other uses that have, or structures or facilities that have been described as sort of similar to this, they tend to have a buffer between those uses that would host these kind of activities and residential areas. This place lacks that buffer. I mean, we literally have 15 feet between the wall of the church and our house. I haven't heard sneakers on the basketball court, but I can tell you that church services on Sunday, when it's like you're sitting right there, you can hear everything that's going on. So how the structure would perform under the proposed use, I think, is a real issue, how you would contain those kind of impacts on the surrounding neighborhood. It would be great, if you can pull something like this off and manage those impacts. I don't know how you structure that into approving a conditional use permit, or whether or not that's possible, but I think those are at least issues that should be discussed more, and we should have some more information about how those kind of impacts would be handled.
Right. Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this board is truthful and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My name is Mick Wolf, and I live in the 300 block on Illinois and know some of the folks who have spoken tonight. And yes, it's true that it's one thing to support incredible proposal, and these pictures are quite amazing, and not to be accused of the NIMBYism. There are some realities that people have talked about, particularly friends who live right across the street, or those of us who live right down the street or half a block away. And those of us who, have had kids in the neighborhood as well, wondering about things at night, weekends, maybe a different kind of thing. But I don't think I can articulate, not even close to what the other people have stated here, because they've expressed the concerns. But Mr. Warmbrun, I think a lot of the logistics and specifics that you brought up, I think are fair things to consider, and to ask to see, at least however this process goes, that there are more specifics in terms of addressing a lot of those issues. So not to recap, but the idea of people coming out, the traffic flow, lawns, late at night, where will people truly park? The 22-inch walls sound great, but we've heard that people who live right next door to it can hear some of the sound seeping through, and if there are bands in there, no matter how beautifully acoustic the place may be, I just wonder about a lot of those things as well. I mean, I've lived in the neighborhood now for, I guess since January 1st of 1989, so I've also been around this particular area for a long time. And I understand the idea of a buffer. A lot of things we adjust to, we get concerned about, and we all make adjustments to things, no doubt. The proposal and ideas, I think a lot of it sounds great in terms of cultural center and some nice ideas. It seems like if there were more things to be fleshed out, and a lot of the specifics that are very fundamental to what a neighborhood looks for, in terms of their concerns that have already been addressed here. Again, as far as sound, traffic, yards, what the flow would be like. And I think your question of, how are things contained? I mean, if parking took place literally at Lincoln Square, for those of us who live right around there, that probably would take care of a lot of it. But as has been stated, how do you address that flow, in the neighborhood? I know that there's a lot of areas that are used to a lot of church traffic, and again, that was stated, but at least there's a rhythm to it. Particularly on Sundays or maybe during the days, but in evening or night times or weekends brings a whole different proposition and composition, I guess, to the area. So without taking up more time, I appreciate the questions that have been posed and logistics, and if this is to proceed, that that there be a good faith effort on all sides to at least take into account the concerns that have been addressed, and I appreciate being here. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much.
Could you sign in, please? Right there. Thank you.
And anyone else from the audience? Yes. And you? Pardon?
I was here in the back.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. My name is Jason Finkelman. I am a resident at 205 West Illinois Street. My wife spoke earlier. I share the same concerns and the same hopes. I really enjoy being a member of Urbana. I have been a fan of the Folk and Roots Festival. I have been a curator and presenter in our community for many years now. I would not like to see the church across the street fall into disrepair. The idea of having a center for performance or arts is intriguing and exciting, but at the same time being right across the street, it's a bit daunting to consider the scope of the audience numbers and the impact that that will have. And I can't imagine that that would not be a detrimental impact on our neighborhood, on the immediate surrounding neighborhood. A couple things that were not mentioned I'd like to mention, and I do, as Mick Wolf just mentioned, I do appreciate Mr. Warmbrun's attention to detail with the specific codes and things that need to be looked into. There's also issues of if there is a commercial kitchen in the basement that's going to be used regularly, that's another type of pollution that could affect our neighborhood. What kind of ventilation would that facility have to ensure that the cooking smells wouldn't be, all over our community when it's in use? I also wonder about having large gatherings of people. I would imagine that no smoking would be permitted inside the facility, so I imagine people would be gathering on the street corners, on my front yard perhaps, in the parking lot across the street to smoke. And, that's not very appealing as well. And I think those are two issues that have come up in my mind that are concerning beyond the other concerns that the folks that have spoken tonight have also addressed. So I'd just like to say that I support all of the other comments about traffic, pedestrian traffic, the noise. I think that if this does go forward, I think some serious sound abatement research has to be done. I would encourage this zoning board to encourage further studies in what it would take to make, this space be the most acceptable to the immediate community to prevent the sound to escape. But as other people noted, when the doors are opening, when the windows are open, we've certainly heard the church proceedings in our house, and but we know that there's a fixed time and it's not late at night, so it's not as disruptive as perhaps a nightclub environment, a drinking establishment would be. So that's what I wanted to share this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And anyone else? All right. I'd just like to get some clarification from staff here. It seems to me that there have been some questions raised in the audience as well as on the board itself about more detailed information, for example, about that might help clarify some of these questions that have been raised, particularly with regards to occupancies and safety requirements, parking may be addressed, and other issues that have been raised tonight. And it seems that we can have a motion on this conditional use tonight and vote it up or down directly, or we have some other alternatives to defer this to a later date, perhaps, with more information. Is that, and
Yes, that is correct.
can you?
You could move to continue the case to a future meeting when we have answers to those questions.
I do have a question for the applicant.
You do. Okay, so can the applicant come forward, please?
Is this building currently air conditioned?
No, it is not. It has very old electrical, very old plumbing, and one boiler that heats, and in this case, does not heat the entire building.
And are you planning to put in air conditioning? 'Cause I'm just thinking about that noise issue. And if you have air conditioning, would there be less noise going out?
You mean, would there be some sort of white noise cancellation?
No, I'm thinking you wouldn't have the windows open then.
Correct, and I mean that is when the project became public, and I did do West Urbana Neighborhood Association listserv email, kind of explaining our visions and our plans, and the only feedback I got was from a direct neighbor, and we certainly opened up the forum for communication and said we'd be happy to have a public meeting, and that was the only dissent we received was from a direct neighbor who said that, yes, in the summer when he had his window open and the church had their window open, they did hear the choir singing. So, but yes, a fully new, non-invasive to the space HVAC system has been budgeted, yes.
You have the opportunity at this time to address any of the concerns that the audience has raised or any questions that the board has raised regarding the your future plans of the facility with regard to issues of public safety and concerns about the building usage. Are there any things that you could help clarify about what your intentions of how this building might be used, and that may address some of the concerns that people have raised tonight?
Of course, and I mean, you know, as I listen to, I certainly understand people's hesitation with having an event center put, you know, in the middle of their neighborhood, which is unfortunately on the edge of town and in a TIF district and an enterprise zone. I wish this building wasn't. But it's not something that's possible to move, and this opportunity doesn't exist anywhere else in downtown Urbana. As far as safety issues go and security issues, all events over so many people will have the regulated amount of security staff. We will also, of course, conform to all building and safety requirements as far as occupancy and egress and fire suppression. I certainly couldn't control where people parked, although there's many parking opportunities directly across the street with hundreds of spaces. We've also looked into valet parking as well as transportation and hiring out transportation and shuttles for events.
Do you have
I have a question. It seems to me from listening to everybody that a concern of people in the audience, and my concern would be late night events, you know, with bands, with weddings with disc jockeys that go till 11, 12 at night.
Well, and there is a neighborhood ordinance for noise, and I know it's
well, there's a neighborhood ordinance, but I mean, how late would you expect? You know, would you have a time limit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's and I believe the ordinance is to 11 o'clock on weekends, and it would certainly shut down and doors would close. Then it wouldn't be an extended hours facility.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can we propose something that would include noise, looking at the potential problem for noise in the neighborhood?
Well, what kind of conditions can we put on a conditional use permit?
You can add conditions to limit the intensity of the use, things such as hours of operation, which we'd probably want to speak with the applicant and firm up, according to her marketing plan, what hours would be acceptable.
Charles raised a good point, and that is ordinarily we, in cases like this, beyond residential uses, we usually get more detailed plans. And usually it's the architect or the engineer who's also available to answer these kind of questions. When we get into these questions of noise abatement, for example, it can be a question of how many people are involved and the hours that the facility operates, but then it's also a question of what can be done architecturally or in engineering to ameliorate certain problems. And once we understand that, then we can make a more informed decision about what is actually going to happen, not what we hope will happen. And in this case, I think a lot of it's aspirational. I haven't heard anything that, in my view, that helps us form a really specific opinion about the usage of this, other than it sounds like a great idea as a proposal, and it probably is a compatible use for this building and would fit the needs of the community in a broad sense. But if there are real concerns that are put forward about issues like noise abatement or occupancies in the building at certain hours of the day or night, that could be an issue down the road that we can't anticipate as a board in granting the conditional use permit. So that's where we, as a board, might be a bit hamstrung right now.
There's also a question of how many windows open in the sanctuary. There's on the west side, there's the office building, which is a buffer, but you have all those stained glass windows. So what are the number of windows that would actually open where noise could come out?
Is it feasible that we can get some drawings in a month, or is it going to be too cost prohibitive?
I think it's possible to get sketches without getting the full architectural renderings and floor plans. Those would certainly help.
And I think what might be most helpful would be to deal with something about the noise issue for the neighborhood.
Okay, I move that we continue the hearing on ZBA case 2015 CO2 till the next regular scheduled meeting for the purpose of receiving drawings of the proposed kitchen and other areas for possible noise abatement problem issue solving and parking issues.
I would add life safety to that,
And
too.
life safety issues also.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. May we have a roll call, please? Is there a discussion of the motion? Any further discussion? All right, may we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Warmbrad,
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong,
Yes.
Ms. Chester,
Yes.
and Ms. Heutman.
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous, so is that clear? What we need? Thank you. And we have one more case. This is a request by Brainbridge CC Urbana Apartment, REIT Incorporated, for a major variance to allow an increase in the area of projecting signage, and another request for a major variance to allow a projecting sign above the first story at 1010 West University Avenue and 508 North Goodwin Avenue in the B3 General Business District.
I'm going to try reopening the file. One moment. There appears to be an error. If you'll excuse me a second, I just need to put the drive back in.
The original Baptist church people that moved to Meyer Ridge, down South Harlow.
There were only, at the end, there were only 5 members of the Baptist church still living.
Okay. So anyways, this is a request for a sign variance for a double-sided projecting sign facing University Avenue on the campus circle development on University Avenue. Just to quickly review, the variance is to 2 major variances for consideration. One variance is for the projecting sign to extend above the first floor. The other variance is to allow it to be larger than the square footage that is allowed in the zoning district. Just to briefly review the development, the campus circle is a mixed-use, high-density development along University and Goodwin, as you'll see in the map. It was approved with several setback variances, as well as a special use permit in 2012 that was reapproved in 2014 as well, and it is finally under construction. This variance request specifically relates to the sign. It is located in the B3 zoning district. You'll see residential to the north, as well as utility right near the railroad track, and then some R5 just directly to the south. It's all obviously along the very busy University Avenue corridor as well. It represents kind of a transition between the residential neighborhoods to the north and the more dense university-oriented neighborhoods to the south. The first floor, just to remind everyone, is meant to be a commercial space, and then above that you'll have apartment uses, which should be numbering about 189, I believe, 180, generally around that number. For the future land use designations, it's zoned as community business, along with some campus mixed use and institutional use to the south and residential designation to the north. The current land uses around it, you'll see, as I said, a utility substation to the north, single-family residential above that, and then some commercial fast food restaurants to its east and west, a hotel a little further down, some parking lots, commercial properties to the south of there as well. And just to go back to the renderings to give an idea of the placement of the sign and where it's located. So the main concern with the development is to have strong signage and identification for the corridor. Obviously, it is a very high volume traffic arterial. It's one of the main east-west thoroughfares through the city of Urbana. You have traffic for the university, traffic for the major hospitals as well, traffic that's headed towards Champaign, and traffic from Champaign headed towards Urbana and towards Urbana's main downtown area. So obviously the building has a very strong need for appropriate signage as well as identification from both directions. The current zoning ordinance allows for a sign that is 32 square feet, and does not allow a sign to extend above the first floor. So this variance is asking for a sign that would be 64.75 square feet, as well as one that extends between the third and fourth stories, if I'm correct. The sign would be approximately 18.5 feet tall and 3.5 feet wide. I didn't find out until today what the specific clearance would be, but it would be well above at least 18 or 19, 20 feet, well above the required 8 feet that's written in the ordinance. So the applicant is requesting a sign that is large enough for the purposes of strong identification for traffic that's bound east and westbound for that area as well. The nature in which they are requesting is for a projecting blade sign which extends slightly outward from the building, but is a vertical in nature as well to better match the scope of the building, since it does extend several stories tall. So to look at the major variance criteria, are there special circumstances or special practical difficulties with reference to the parcel concerned, or in carrying out the strict application of the ordinance? If the sign were to be smaller, there would be questions as to how appropriately it would allow for identification of the building or of the development as well. If it were to be nearly half the size or significantly smaller, it is a dense development. It is a larger building that contains dozens of units, as well as commercial bound traffic on the first floor. So there is a compelling need to provide signage that gives good identification. And obviously, as we've seen with other cases in the past several months and over the past several years, past 2 decades, a concern with proper identification and wayfinding and traffic is highly important along this corridor. The second question: does the proposed variance will not serve as a special privilege because the variance requested is necessary due to special circumstances relating to the land or structure involved, or to be used for occupancy thereof, which is not generally applicable to other lands or structures in the same district? The building takes up a good large footprint, has a very close frontage to University Avenue. It does not, the signage options are limited from that regard. A two-sided projecting sign would allow for an outcome that's consistent with illustrations and with the scope of the building, which has been vetted and approved through the appropriate city processes in previous, through the Plan Commission, through the City Council, and through previous meetings. The next question: the variance requested was not the result of a situation or condition having been knowingly or deliberately created by the petitioner. The general size and scale of the building, as I mentioned earlier, was approved by the Plan Commission and City Council through a special use permit. Although the signage is a separate variance, it allows for signage that's compatible with the scale of the building and its location, which is very prominent, very close to the street, as well as along a very busy corridor of traffic. The variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The property occupies a site as I mentioned, in a transitional zone between a residential neighborhood to the north and the university to the south. Projecting blade side of that size is, how should I put it, consistent with the scale of that building, but also consistent with some of the signage that also can be found along that corridor. Obviously, those signs were approved or installed at a time before a lot of our criteria in the current zoning ordinance were put in place, but it at least establishes that they would not be, that the sign would not be very out of place with, its neighbors and with other businesses and buildings along University Avenue. I also just want to show in Exhibit D that in the renderings you'll see that because of the vertical nature of the sign that it does not extend the shadow or the footprint of the building much greatly for the building that already exists. Because it's vertical, that allows it to attach very nicely to the project. And the last question, the variance represents generally the minimum deviation from requirements of the zoning ordinance necessary to accommodate the request. The size and the placement of the sign meet the requirements that are necessary for proper identification. The scale is consistent with approved architectural and illustrations of previous applications. And another thing that staff has observed in conversations about this project and the signage is that it's kind of a more, I would say, contemporary aspect of design that's come about in more recent years. Maybe that was more frequent decades ago, but sort of was becoming less common. And I just wanted to show that towards the end I included two different examples of where this has been done elsewhere in the area. You'll see that this is in downtown Champaign. It's also a two-sided projecting blade sign for Jupiter's. For a building that's also of similar height as this development would be, you can judge for yourself as to whether that's how intrusive or lack thereof that might be for the area. I also just wanted to show an example of where this was done elsewhere in the city. This is a smaller sign that obviously doesn't extend above the first story, but is a blade sign on the Gregory Place development, close to campus as well. And then an example that I just realized today, which is it's a taller development, but in downtown Champaign, the Hyatt building, I believe, also has a projecting blade sign of a similar nature. So it's certainly worth consideration that this might merit an adjustment in the zoning ordinance for future consideration. But that will be another case, obviously, if it ever comes through. And so with those factors in consideration, the zoning board of appeals must approve both because both of these are major variances. They must approve them by 2/3 to forward them to the city council. They may also forward it with a recommendation to approve with certain terms and conditions, or recommend conditions or from the articulated findings accordingly. They may also deny the variance as well. They should choose to. Based on these facts and this information, staff recommends that the Zoning Board of Appeals approve the variances to allow us a sign that is 64.75 square feet in area and one that extends above the first floor. I guess one more bit of information I want to provide is that the allowed square footage, if it were a freestanding sign, would be much significantly greater, much closer to 64.75 square feet. Than the main restriction with this is that it's attached to the building, and because it's a projecting sign attached to the building, that is the restriction that is limiting it to 32 square feet. So I understand that a representative from the applicant is here tonight, Randy, who's involved with construction of the property for Bainbridge Partners. But with that said, if you have any questions.
Okay, Chris, thank you. Any questions for staff?
Do you know how tall that Jupiter sign is?
I wasn't able to get specific measurements on
to see it again?
Jupiter's sign. Let me see if I can.
That isn't, that's the height of a story. That's
Well,
a-
it's a story and floor are not necessarily the same measurement. A story, I believe, is a specific
Well,
architectural
right.
term. But
Right. So this one is gonna be how many feet again? 18?
yeah, that's not the clearance. That's the height. The clearance would be similar to that, but I'd have to double check the figure.
Clearance, to the ground?
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the height.
Okay. Yeah. Height is 8.5.
Well, you're saying it's gonna be 20 feet off the ground, and then the sign itself is 18.5 feet, so you're
Yeah.
talking 38.5 feet approximately to the top.
Yeah.
Is that?
Give or take.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Yes.
Between Race Street and Goodwin, are there any other non-conforming signs? I drove down there and I didn't see any sign that was higher than what we allow.
The issue of non-conforming signs wasn't taken too much into consideration in the sense that the majority of them were installed before most of our current sign regulation was put into place. I would have to check specifically about what the height of those signs were, but I know that many of them extend higher than at least higher than 10 to 15 feet.
Is there any, do you foresee in the future that any other businesses in the area would then want to have a similar sign at a similar height in order to advertise their business?
I can't foresee what future developments will be along that. Are you talking about in that zoning
Existing
district?
yes, and
Or-
existing businesses between Race
Okay.
and Lincoln or Goodwin.
I can't foresee exactly what specific developments would be, but that would depend on the sign that they're requesting, if it's a freestanding wall sign or a monument sign or a projecting blade sign or in perhaps, but that's based on, the requests of future developments, which we don't know are existing yet. It's possible they might request a variance, but
Yeah, I don't think this particular sign will precipitate requests for variances. This is a very unique sign in that it's a tall, very tall building that's close to the sidewalk. Most developments along University Avenue, they're set back pretty far. There's parking in front, so they all want a freestanding sign instead of a projecting sign.
Well, my question is, will they then want a sign that will be more visible and be 18 feet in length and 18 feet off the ground?
they would still have to answer the criteria that this application has tried to answer in terms of, would that sign be disruptive compared to its neighbors? Would it be out of scope for the size of the building? Would it be larger than would it deviate more than is necessary for proper identification purposes down the street? So, I mean, there's still those 5 questions that it has to be vetted through.
Charles? Okay, for the record, is this sign lighted?
I don't believe so, but the applicant might be able to specify that if.
Do you know how big the letters are?
I don't have specific measurements on the size of the lettering, but
Do we know what it's made of?
I imagine it would probably be made of metal material, but I don't have. You can see that the rendering provides some.
Well, getting back to the last case, it would have been nice just to have one page with the sign itself on there, its dimensions and things, so we could look at the sign, since that's what we're looking at is the sign. But
I didn't have that information available.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Would the petitioner like to speak?
My name's Randy Barrett, and I'm a construction manager with Bainbridge. And from what I understand on the sign, it will be lit. It's an LED sign, so it'll be a soft lighting. It'll have a metal frame, and will probably be a, not plastic, but at least kind of a see-through or
Translucent.
acrylic, there you go.
Plastic.
Type of
Space
sign.
age.
Basically, it's going to start about the second floor to the fourth floor. It's a 5-story building, so you'd have one floor up before it's the bottom of the sign, and then you'd have another story above the top of the sign. Our goal is that it looks like it's a part of the building versus you've just got a big sign stuck out in front of your building. One of the things we try to do is kind of make the sign look like it's incorporated into the building versus its own entity, where it just kind of looks like it's a part of what we have developed. It's the only signage that we're going to have on the building for identifying it as the campus circle. Coming off of Goodwin is going into a parking garage, so there won't be any signage there. So this is basically the biggest thing that we've got to identify what we have there.
Any other questions for the petitioner? All right. Please sign in.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you wish to make a motion? I would suggest that we make a motion on each separate major variance. So we'll start with the first one.
I move that we approve ZBA case number 2015 major -02, a request by Bainbridge for major variance to allow an increase in the area of the projecting sign up to 64.75 square feet at 1010 West University Avenue in the B3 General Business District.
Second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, maybe we have a roll call, please.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Chester?
Yes.
Ms. Uteman?
No.
Mr. Warmbrand?
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes. Can we have the second motion?
I move ZBA case number 2015-major-03, request by Bainbridge CC for a major variance to allow a projecting sign located above the first story at 1010 West University Avenue in the B3 General Business District.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. May we have a roll call, please? Oh, discussion? Is there a discussion? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious. This is just for one sign, not one sign at 1010 West University and 508 North Goodwin?
It's one connected building.
It's one connected building, that's why.
So we're talking about one sign at one
for-
entrance.
For the entire complex, for the complex in this case. All right.
Ms. Chester?
Yes.
Ms. Uteman?
Yes.
Mr. Warmbrand?
Yes.
And Mr. Armstrong?
Yes. I just want to make one comment for the record on this issue of signage, because we keep changing the signage ordinance in effect, in principle, by these variances. And I think these are likely, like this blade sign, I think is a unique situation. But it may come up again in the future. I think it's there's a clear desire for these kind of signs to be incorporated or integrated into the architecture, and I think that that's probably a good thing in general. It seems to me that the way that this case was presented by staff was with the rationale that signage is somehow related to the scale of the building. Finding signage that's somehow related to the scale and works with the architecture of the building in these cases, which I think is a sensible rationale for signage. What I'm getting at is, and you brought this up, Christopher, in your presentation, and that is that some of these issues need to go back to zoning or other units of government to rethink the whole signage issue. Because we're finding that the signs are either undersized and inadequate to provide the kind of advertising that people require today, or that our signage ordinances aren't adequate in the technologies that are available. Moving signs come under that category in particular. And then finally, we scrutinize so carefully these signs that go on buildings or with businesses, and yet we pay a lot less attention, apparently, to billboards. So there's a lack of balance in our concerns about signage, the negative impacts that signage can have versus the positive impacts that they have for businesses. So please, I encourage staff to rethink our whole signage policy. Not that we can address every issue, but I think it's time to do that.
And I agree with you, and I just think that, we may then have more requests for variances in our signage.
The thing that was interesting to me was that if they put it on the ground, they could have a bigger sign. They stuck it in the front.
But they built the apartments too close to the road when we gave them the other variance to put a
Oh.
sign on the ground, that
Oh.
size.
It couldn't be a monument sign, they don't have room for it.
Oh.
No. This is a larger discussion, and I
Yeah.
think this isn't the venue, but I just wanted to go on record, because these issues come before us frequently, and I feel that we're always rewriting the ordinance, in effect.
Yeah, we've heard you loud and clear, and we are working on an ordinance update, an omnibus ordinance update to address several issues. So we will take a look at our signage requirements and see if there's a particular type of variance that's been granted a lot recently, and see if we need to make adjustments.
Is there any old business
No, sir.
or new business?
Nope.
Staff report?
Just to let you know, this case will be going to council on Monday, April 19th. And also, the mayor has appointed Lori Pearson to be the new manager of the planning division. So we look forward to her starting in May.
And is there a study session? Nope. Okay, so we are adjourned.